Alrighty, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being on time and thank you for joining us today. So my name is Joanne. I'm the Program Director for Graduate Professional Success for STEM PhDs and postdocs at the University of California, Irvine. If you don't know me yet, hello, good to meet you and thanks for joining us. Today we're taking a look and jumping into a Life Beyond PhD session. And this session really celebrates the end of one journeys and we really explore different careers that you could pursue with a PhD. And this is meant to be a casual and informal talk. So the general format is about 20 minutes of storytelling from our speaker, 20 minutes of open Q&A, and 10 minutes at the end for folks to be able to network individually, especially if you're on the shyer type. Feel free to drop your questions into the chat and I'll actually collect those. If our speaker sees it and they want to pause for questions and answer it then and there, we will. If not, I will go ahead and collect them for the end. And if you're feeling shy or if you're feeling brave, feel free to raise your hand and ask those questions at the end as well. Before I jump into about our speaker, just a couple more announcements of upcoming events, more Life Beyond PhD stuff. If you're still really fascinated about teaching careers, we have another one coming up next week in person with Dr. Scott Egan. For those who are thinking about national labs and wanting to pursue a different type of career there, we have one afterwards in December with Mary Berkey. And then finally, wrapping up the year, our last one is with Chantel for those who want to continue in this sort of medical space, medical education, but more towards medical writing and consulting. We will touch on that on December to wrap up the year. So without further ado then, I'm going to briefly introduce our speaker today and then hand it off to Bonnie. So Bonnie Douglas earned her BS in biology from Washington College in 2016 and her PhD in immunology from the University of Pennsylvania in 2021. After she completed her doctoral work, she transitioned into her current position and company at Prime Education. And the talk will highlight really Dr. Douglas's transition out of academia, differences in sort of the medical education at Prime versus traditional academic institutions, and the key skill sets needed to be able to pursue a similar path. So in addition to that, Dr. Douglas's career talk, Prime Education University Ambassador Elizabeth will also be providing information about a manager of scientific affairs role that they are currently recruiting for. And I'll drop all that information on more information for that role, how to get connected with our speakers. And without further ado, I will pass the screen share to Dr. Douglas.
Thanks so much, Joanne, for the introduction. Let's see if I can get this pulled up. Okay. Alrighty, can you see the slide?
Looks good. You're good to go.
Awesome. Alrighty, well, so thank you so much for coming today. I'm really excited to share with you all my story about going from doing a PhD in immunology to working in continuing medical education. And I really want to emphasize that this is going to be a story about trusting the process. I did not set out to join CME when I was a grad student. When I was in college, this was definitely something that I learned about sort of as I went through my graduate school experience. And so I just want to emphasize that I think it's really important to try new things and kind of figure out who you are and what you like and how you can find a career that kind of best fits that. So as Joanne mentioned, my name is Bonnie. Bonnie is fine. I am an associate director of scientific affairs with Prime Education. And I'm going to tell you sort of about the end of my journey first, because I, again, did not know what continuing medical education was when I was a graduate student. And so I think it's helpful to provide some background up front. So as you can see on the bottom of this slide, CME sort of at its most basic definition is required for healthcare professionals to maintain licensure and certification. So anyone who's becoming a healthcare professional, whether that's a doctor or a pharmacist or a nurse, obviously goes to school. They complete their degree. They usually take an exam to become licensed initially to practice. But obviously it doesn't end there. They continue to educate themselves throughout their careers. And as part of that, and as part of maintaining licensure to practice, they have to earn a certain number of CME credits throughout their periods of recertification. And so that's kind of the most basic definition of what CME is. But CME also is really important for accelerating the adoption of new advances and new research into clinical practice. And so as you can see on the left hand of this slide, it can take up to 17 years. I think that's on average even for new research to trickle down into clinical practice. And it's a really long time, when you have patients whose quality of life depends on some of these new emerging therapies. So CME is really useful for disseminating that information out to healthcare professionals and giving them some tricks and tools to actually implement these new advances into their clinical practice. So what is Prime Education? As I mentioned, I work for Prime Education, and we are sort of first and foremost an accredited CME provider. So we do a lot of traditional CME work. That's things like live webinars. We put together recorded videos that providers can watch on their own time. We do quizzes and interactive case challenges that are meant to be a little bit more, kind of fun and engaging for our providers. But all of those different activities provide CME credit that fulfills that requirement for healthcare professionals to stay licensed. However, in addition to that, we also do a lot of what we call quality improvement work. And that's sort of exactly what it sounds like. It's essentially interventions and different approaches that are meant to improve the quality of healthcare that's being delivered, make clinical workflows and processes more efficient, and ultimately, hopefully, improve patient outcomes. So as you can see on this slide, Prime has been really kind of a longstanding player in this field. We've won a number of awards for our QI work over the past 5 or so years. We've published dozens of papers in this area. I think this year alone, we're probably coming up on about 30 publications, which is really exciting. And I think, it just shows how we're actively kind of growing in this space. And we've had a number of really exciting outcomes from these programs too. One of which I'll talk about is the top left outcome on this slide. So this was a quality improvement program that the infectious diseases team, which I'm part of, did a couple of years ago. That was really focused on overcoming and addressing vaccine hesitancy, particularly around COVID-19 vaccination. So this was done right when they were first coming online. I'm sure you're all aware of some of the hesitancy that existed, around people being, scared or skeptical around getting COVID-19 vaccination. And so essentially what this program did was Prime developed a presentation that was meant to be patient friendly that we sent to a number of clinics that we partnered with, and healthcare professionals at these clinics either had patients come in and sit through a presentation about safety and efficacy and different answers to their questions about COVID-19 vaccination, or they took those presentations out into the community and actually in coffee shops, in different community settings, shared that with the community that they are embedded in. And what was really exciting was that when we looked at the outcomes from this program, we saw that when we looked at the percentage of people who came in who were not vaccinated at the time of the session, and then followed up with them a couple of months later, we found that 86% of those attendees actually got a vaccine after coming to our program, which was awesome. And I think really speaks to kind of the power of these types of quality improvement sessions and patient education sessions on patient outcomes and vaccine acceptance, which is really cool. This isn't the only model we use. There's a couple of other examples on this slide. There's one example that we've been doing in cardiology where we developed a tool to essentially expedite the application process for prior authorization, particularly for a drug that's being used to treat hyperlipidemia. And so this is something that's being piloted in some of our partner cardiology clinics right now to see how it will impact not only clinical workflows and sort of how much time providers are spending filling out these applications, but also how that affects patient outcomes and their ability to access these really important medications. And then the other thing I really want to highlight too on this slide is that Prime does a lot of our quality improvement work through a lens of health equity. So as we're all, I'm sure, aware, there are a number of different really pervasive disparities in the American healthcare system. And so Prime, acknowledges that and does a lot of work to try to address that, working with some of the clinics that we partner with. And so these are examples on the bottom right hand of this slide where we've partnered particularly with patient advocacy groups that really advocate for different marginalized and minoritized populations to really try to understand what are some of the key barriers that these populations face. What are these patients and populations looking for in their healthcare? What do they think could most be improved, and how can we feed that back to providers and healthcare professionals to improve the quality of care that's being delivered to all patients, but especially to these more underserved and marginalized groups. So to sort of switch gears now and talk about what I specifically do at Prime. So as I mentioned, I am an associate director for scientific affairs, which is just one of many teams at Prime. But really what scientific affairs, or SA, focuses on is content development. So we develop really all of the educational materials for our CME programming, as well as for our quality improvement work. But I don't just do content development. I think this is really what makes me enjoy my job as much as I do. We also have touch points kind of along the life cycle of programs. And I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. But I'm involved kind of upstream of content development in actually developing concepts for our programs and kind of putting together what's this program going to look like, what's it going to focus on. I write grants so that we can actually get money to do our programs and to bring that to healthcare providers. I write surveys, so this is how we assess the impact not only of our CME work on provider knowledge and competency, but also of our quality improvement programs. And I'm also involved to some extent in data review. So I look at some of the outcomes data that we get, and I actually synthesize that into publications as well. So I'm still actively involved in publishing and contributing to the literature, which is really meaningful to me. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what excites me about this role in a minute. But I do also just want to highlight here on the left hand of the slide that we work in a number of different therapeutic areas too. So I mentioned I work in infectious diseases. I'll talk a bit about how my PhD sort of led into that. But we also work in neurology, mental health, endocrinology, immunology, really, a number of different fields within clinical medicine. So I think kind of regardless of what your expertise is, if you're doing something biologically or biomedically related, there's probably a space where you can use that expertise in our company. And then finally, I already alluded to this, but this just really sort of shows what the project lifecycle looks like, really both for our CME and for our quality improvement programs. And again, I just want to highlight that while probably kind of depending on the week, like 50 to 80% of my time is spent really on content development, I do get to do a lot of work developing concepts. I write a lot of grants. I get the opportunity to work with expert faculty, which is really exciting. So I get to talk to experts in the field. They guide our programming. They, make sure it's all accurate. They review for content, and then they're the ones presenting it. So I coordinate with faculty quite a bit. Obviously, program implementation kind of takes over once we've got content developed. So they're the ones kind of leading webinars and making sure that logistically everything goes well. But I do sometimes sit in on meetings and kind of provide a second set of hands if I can. And then again, finally, as I mentioned, I'm involved in writing surveys. I review some of that outcomes data once we get it back and get it processed. And then again, I'm kind of putting together that data for publication as well. So really exciting. And I think my day-to-day is very varied, which I really enjoy. I'm not always doing the same thing day in and day out, which is awesome. But now that I've talked a little bit about kind of what I do and the company that I work for now, I'll sort of go back to the beginning and explain kind of how I got here. So Joanna already mentioned kind of what my educational background is. I, went directly from undergrad to grad school, and then I finished up at Penn in, I guess, fall 2021, so about 2 years ago, after I finished my PhD in immunology. But I do want to highlight that really my PhD focused on immune responses to parasitic helminth infections. So it was very embedded in infectious disease. This is my Twitter, my X bio, whatever they call it now. And you can tell that I made a really large part of my personality about worms back in the day. So I've had a longstanding interest in infectious diseases, and I think it's really valuable to me that I still get to use that content knowledge and kind of pursue that interest in my current line of work at Prime. When I talk about sort of transitioning from my PhD to the work that I'm currently doing in continuing medical education, I think it's helpful to sort of put it into context, what I liked about my graduate school experience. And some of the things that I maybe didn't love or that sort of inspired me to, consider other paths. So some of what I liked, as you can see, some lab work I really enjoyed. So I, worked in an immunology lab. A lot of what I was doing was pipetting at the bench, which I really enjoyed, kind of like getting in a rhythm of pipetting. I'll skip to the end of the list, but I loved having opportunities to travel. I think I sort of hit the jackpot with where my conferences in grad school got held. I got to go to Greece. I got to go to South Africa. I had a lot of really amazing opportunities to travel and present my work. And then sort of, all of the stuff in the middle, right? So I love learning and talking about science. I was, as anyone in academia, I'm sure can relate, like it's so much fun being around tons of smart people and being able to bounce ideas off of one another all the time. Analyzing and thinking about data. I really like sort of putting my data into a bigger context and sort of thinking about how do I visualize this? How do I tell a story? How do I contextualize this with a larger literature? And writing was another really kind of big thing that I liked about grad school, and particularly grants. I liked writing manuscripts, but you're so confined at that point to the data that you have. Whereas with grants, I think you sort of use the data as a starting point, and then you can be creative and kind of come up with new ideas. So I loved that as well. And then finally, teaching, tutoring, and mentoring. I think, I had a lot of really great opportunities to TA, to tutor. I served as a mentor for younger students when I was a senior graduate student. And those were just really great opportunities, I think, that really inspired me to consider kind of career in education of some kind. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about how I chose CME and not any other form of education. But that was sort of what my interests were. Some of the things I didn't love, though, were so first and foremost, I think, I got to the end of my PhD and I was really at a point where I didn't want to be doing work with animal models anymore. I think this is super important. But for me personally, and immunology is so heavily reliant on mammalian models, it got to a point where it was just really taking an emotional toll. And so I think, I just sort of had to be honest with myself about, every question I wanted to ask in immunology would have required me to continue with mouse work, and I just didn't really want to continue having that be part of my day to day. I've kind of politely put up here navigating academic culture. And I think, academia can be a great place. I met so many great people in academia. It's, there's tons of freedom. But I think along with that, there could be a real lack of boundaries. And I personally really struggled to kind of set my own boundaries. I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I felt like, people expected me to be like on email all the time and responsive. And it was getting to a point where it wasn't great for my mental health or where I wanted my work-life balance to be. And so I think I just, wanted to sort of try other avenues to kind of sort of see if I could get, a job that would allow me to finesse that work-life balance a little bit more effectively. And then finally, I think this is probably the biggest point is really that delayed gratification. And I sort of flippantly put up here that failed experiments make me sad. I think they make everybody sad. But I think for me personally, my PhD involved a lot of technical troubleshooting. And it would be like 3 or 4 week long experiments that, you'd finally come to an end and then it fails, not because the hypothesis isn't supported, but because something technically went wrong and the whole thing is like kaput and not useful. So that was really difficult to kind of cope with on a day to day. And I think coupling that with the fact that basic research, while extremely important and extremely valuable, often doesn't come to fruition in terms of having an impact on health outcomes, on how patients are actually doing in clinic until decades later, if it ultimately leads to new therapeutics at all. I think was just really difficult for me to kind of find my why, as I was kind of going through that day-to-day frustration. So I think in the end, I sort of, decided, okay, I need to find something that makes me feel like I have a more immediate impact on society. For me, being in immunology and being in a biomedical science space, that really meant, having an impact on healthcare and on medicine. So that was sort of what led me to seek careers outside of academia or traditional bench science. So I think, when I started looking for jobs, again, as I sort of already alluded to, I was really looking to have a more immediate impact on healthcare, on society. I wanted a better work-life balance. And particularly, I was looking for jobs that would offer remote options, maybe not entirely remote, but just offer some flexibility in terms of being able to sometimes work from home. And of course, as I think anybody in academia can relate to, you don't want to do a PhD and then leave the whole thing behind, right? Like you want something that's still relevant to your content knowledge. You can use your transferable skills. But I just particularly wanted to try something new and try something maybe outside of the academic setting. Some of what I wanted to avoid, on the other hand, so I mentioned that I like teaching. I really do like being up in front of people occasionally. And I really like, kind of developing curriculum, thinking about how to teach different topics. But I am not a particularly like high energy person. I could not see myself like up in front of students all day, every single day. And so I didn't think that like K through 12 or collegial teaching was necessarily the best fit for me. As I mentioned, I was sort of, looking to leave lab work and bench work behind. And then finally, so as I was starting to apply for jobs, I applied to a number of positions in sort of like STEM curriculum development or STEM outreach. I applied to a couple of positions that were still in academia, actually, but more focused on, again, outreach or science communication as opposed to bench research. And then I also started going down the path of like medical writing. But I very quickly learned that a lot of medical writing positions are much more like regulatory or very technical. Sometimes you're writing like package inserts or like, regulatory documents for different organizations. And while that's obviously very necessary and I'm sure is a great fit for some people, that just wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So sort of having these parameters in mind of kind of what I was looking for. I think I probably spent about 3 months applying. I think in total I applied to about 10 or 12 jobs, which I know is like low for some people. And I feel very lucky to have found the position that I found when I did. But ultimately, that was about what my application process looked like before I accepted my current role with Prime. And I do want to highlight that I started at Prime as a manager. So that's sort of our like entry level position in scientific affairs when you come from, as I did, like right out of a PhD. And then I got promoted last April to associate director. So just as a forewarning, if you're coming right out of your PhD, that's basically what you're looking at. So I'll wrap up quickly and then we can spend the rest of the time on questions. But what I want to highlight is just, I think, how good of a fit Prime is for me. And I think, I mentioned that this talk is about trusting the process, but I feel like I've been very fortunate in that my process thus far has been pretty simple. But I think, you know, Prime allows me to do a lot of what I liked doing in grad school still. So I still get to learn and talk about science. I get to meet with experts in the field and stay up to date on kind of the latest updates and advances that are coming down the pike. I still get to think about and analyze data, and not just my own outcomes data, but also like going through the literature and like, thinking about, okay, this is the data in the paper. How do I show this to healthcare professionals in a way that's straightforward? I spend a lot of time writing grants, which is hilarious to me that I put this up here as something I like because I feel like every time I get a grant, I'm like, oh God, another grant. But then I finish writing it and I'm like, oh, I love grants. So I really do enjoy that part of my job, despite I think what Bonnie writing grants thinks. Um, I still get to think about, kind of how to teach content. So our faculty are the ones who actually present our educational content. I'm not up in front of people teaching. But obviously I still have to think about, anytime I have a new project, how would I teach this to somebody? How can I, communicate this effectively and clearly? And excitingly, I do still get some opportunities to travel. So I haven't been international yet with Prime, sadly. But I got the opportunity to go to Boston last month to go to ID Week. And so we do still get opportunities here and there to go to different conferences too, which is really exciting. And then finally, I think Prime just ticks so many boxes for me. Doing the quality improvement work, especially that we do, really makes me feel like I have more of an immediate impact on healthcare, on quality of patient care, on hopefully making a little bit of an impact on some of those disparities that I mentioned. I think my work-life balance is great. My coworkers are great. I'm not just saying that because Elizabeth is here. I, work with a lot of really talented, smart people. And I work fully remotely now too, which is really great for me and I think a really good fit for what I was looking for. And I also want to mention, I'm not gonna lie, like there are definitely like nights that I work. There are, there have been a couple of weekends where I've had to like get on, but that is absolutely the exception. It's not the rule. And I've never had anyone say to me, oh, I sent you an email at 9 p.m. last night and you didn't respond until 9 a.m. the next morning. Like everybody's very, I think, understanding that, everybody has different work-life balance, everybody has different boundaries, and I think people are generally very respectful of that. And I've definitely gotten to continue using my transferable skills from my PhD too. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. Elizabeth, if you have anything you want to say about this slide, please feel free to jump in. But otherwise, I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. I'm Elizabeth. I'm just gonna jump in to say, after this talk, I mean, thank you to Bonnie. She's shared like so much about her career journey, and she's right. I mean, like herself, we have a lot of great team members.
I think you accidentally muted yourself,
I
or
did.
someone did.
I did. Anyway, but I was just thanking Bonnie, and then if any of you are interested in potentially pursuing an opportunity in continued education with Prime, we have a couple opportunities opening up for our manager role, both towards the end of the year and then into the new year. So if you scan that code, it'll take you directly to our application site. Or if you want to reach out to me and have more questions, I'm happy to answer anything, any questions you have, whether it be, via email or a call. I'm happy to make the time to connect.
I see a question from Talia. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you so much for providing your career trajectory. I felt like I resonated a lot with it. I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow looking to transition outside of academia, but you gave a lot of insights into what you really enjoyed about graduate school, what you really enjoy being at Prime. I like
Sorry.
your but what are some of the challenges that you faced transitioning into your role at Prime as a manager when you began? Are those challenges still relevant in your new role, or how have you overcome them?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And definitely, I think coming out of a PhD, I was very like, oh, I just finished a PhD. I can do anything, right? Like, and I mean, you do come out with a lot of skills, but also transitioning into a very different career, like continuing medical education is very different, I think, than being in bench research. So there was a lot that I had to sort of adjust to. I think the most obvious differences were, working for a company, there's just like internal workflows that you have to learn, right? And it takes a little bit of time to sort of get used to. We have like a project management software that we use. So there's like little, tweaks and like nuances you have to learn with that. Just how to like kind of professionally communicate with people. I consider myself like a pretty nice and professional person, but like academic culture and professional corporate culture are a little bit different. So kind of learning to navigate that. I wouldn't say it was challenging, but just kind of a little bit of a learning curve. I will say probably the biggest challenge I had, and I really sort of hate admitting this to myself, but was like seeing kind of the human side of medicine. I think coming from a scientific background, so working in infectious diseases, one of the areas that we do a lot of work in is HIV. And I was not a virologist, but I can read a paper and kind of figure out like, this is how the HIV life cycle or viral cycle works, like this is how antiretroviral therapy works. Like that wasn't necessarily difficult. But learning about, just the socio-political like issues attached to HIV, learning about some of the patient experiences, some of the challenges that people have, and really appreciating that like that is part of my job is to like, appreciate that these are some of the challenges that people go through, and this is something that providers have to contend with and need to be educated about. I think was just a very it sounds really obvious, right? But I think coming from a scientific background and being so hyper focused on just the science was definitely sort of something that I had to learn and sort of grow into as part of this new role. So, but I do think I will say like you have to give yourself some grace, right? Because I think transitioning into any kind of different career, there's always going to be a little bit of a learning curve. And I think everybody expects that. I think you're probably going to be the hardest on yourself when you first start. And so just knowing to expect that and knowing to kind of give yourself some time is really important.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
We have a question from chat from Gabriella. What were the job qualifications required to apply for the job? I actually linked the job description, so that way she had that. But maybe a different way to ask it was one to you in reflection, Bonnie. What do you think made you stand out as a candidate for Prime to choose you? And then the second one is, as you're hiring for this role, what are the most important qualities that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be totally transparent. I'm not involved in hiring yet. I'm not that high up the ladder. So I don't want to, speak and give any false information on that end. But I will say, so I had a number of publications, not just, like first author research publications, but I'd done a lot of like review articles during graduate school. I'd also like gained some experience. So I was finishing up my PhD during the pandemic, so I was spending a lot of time at home. So I learned like Adobe Illustrator. I had like picked up some like graphic design skills too to like actually like make figures for some of my reviews and papers. So I think having those like writing and like communication skills and being able to demonstrate and like send like here's this review paper that I wrote and made figures for and like did a bunch of work to like clearly communicate this like complex area, I think was really helpful. I think also some of my teaching experience I think really helped. So I was a tutor kind of throughout undergrad and grad school. I was a TA for our immunology class for our graduate students. And then I had also basically developed like a student prep course to help students prepare for like the first year immunology course. So that I think also really sort of, I don't want to say it made me stand out, but like I think that was something that I had sort of gone out of my way to do because I felt like it was necessary at Penn for my program. And I think really showed initiative and also showed that, I could put together curriculum, like I could put together educational programming. So I think having both that teaching experience, then also being able to demonstrate that you're a strong writer, you're a strong communicator, are probably some of the most important aspects of coming to this job. I will also say I don't know that it's easy to demonstrate this on an application, but I think being in research also makes you a really strong, well, I think most people I know in research have very strong organizational skills because you have to, because you're balancing 15 different things. And I think that's also something to really sort of sell is like, you can manage different projects, you can, keep yourself organized, you can stay on top of deadlines, things like that. Because those are definitely skills that I use every day in this job too. Elizabeth, if you have anything you want to add to that, feel free.
No, I think you said it perfectly. I think you highlighted a lot of the main things that we look at. I think obviously everyone comes to this application and interview process with a different background and unique qualities that make them stand out. But I do think, we do focus on education, an enthusiasm for communication, maybe, some interest in design, because, our team is really Renaissance ladies and men, being able to do a lot of what they do. But there is also a lot of on-the-job training that we realize that we don't expect everyone to know exactly what they're supposed to do the first day, let alone the first year. We always say it takes about a year to hit your stride. So luckily, we have an amazing team who's there to support you through the process. But I think you summarized it perfectly, Bonnie.
Carleen, I don't know if you want to unmute.
Oh yeah, did you want to get to the other chat questions first?
I'm going back and forth.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Carleen. I'm a fifth year student in neuroscience, so I'm very close to graduating. I guess I have kind of a twofold question for each of you, Bonnie and Elizabeth. One for Bonnie. I know you already listed in your talk a whole bunch of things that are keeping you at Prime or why you like your current job. But do you have a really very quick anecdote, I guess, on like what is truly the turning point where you realize like, oh, this is like a nice career path for me. Like I could see myself clicking really well, continuing down this road. And then the second one really quickly for Elizabeth or maybe both of you is how far down the road are you looking to hire someone new? Like let's say, like I said, I'm a fifth year, so I'm looking soon, but I'm not sure like how long that process is or if there's like a small overlap, like internship first or something like that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'll take the first and then defer to Elizabeth for the second half. Yeah, so I think really, and it sounds kind of cliche, but like even in my like orientation week, so when I joined Prime, I knew that they did continuing medical education. I sort of had a vague idea of what that entailed. But I did not appreciate like what quality improvement was. I didn't appreciate how much of it Prime did when I joined. And I think when I started, I was definitely like, I think this will be something good to try. I'm excited to try this, but I don't know exactly, how good of a fit this is going to be. And learning about all of the quality improvement work that Prime does and also getting to be a part of that has like absolutely sold me on like this is a really good fit for me. I think I was worried at first. I was looking at a lot of like nonprofit opportunities when I first started applying for jobs. I think I really wanted to like be doing STEM outreach and, inspiring kids to do research and, working in community settings and things like that. So starting a corporate job, I think felt like I was selling out a little bit. But like Prime has resources, Prime has a lot of ways to do some of the work that I was interested in doing sort of on the community level. We're just a little bit higher up in that we're sort of helping organize that with community partnerships. We work with CBOs, we work with community clinics, we work with like organizations that support people experiencing homelessness. We work with organizations that support people experiencing, substance use disorder. So we work with a lot of like vulnerable populations, and we still have a really strong impact, I think, as I was saying, on trying to make an impact on some of those health and social disparities. But we just kind of do it in kind of a non-traditional way that I didn't know existed before I started here. So I think that's really what sold me on it.
Yeah, there are a couple questions in chat that I want to get to, and then we'll go to Rebecca's question. The ones before from Natalie and Miriam are kind of looking at necessary components and minimal requirements. So Natalie had asked, is grant writing necessary? component of the manager position from someone who's not a biggest fan of grant writing? And then from Miriam, along the similar lines, can someone with a PhD in biology and or biochemistry apply minimal requirements?
I'll quickly take that first one. I think, I mean, the second one, yes, I think so. I mean, we have somebody I think on our team who did a PhD in like bioengineering. So not as like quite medically related as maybe immunology is. But yeah, I think we take applications from a wide variety of different PhD backgrounds. But I'll also say, shoot, I lost my train of thought. Oh, grant writing. So yes, grant writing is kind of a necessary part of my job, but I think my understanding is that there are other CME companies that are a little bit more siloed. So I think Prime is sort of unique in how involved we are throughout the project life cycle, but there are different, I think, avenues you can go in CME that are more focused on just content development or just grant writing. Sometimes grant writing gets binned under like business strategy. So you're actually like identifying like, opportunities to submit grants to supporters. You're, more involved in actually developing concepts for the programs, and then you hand the whole program off to somebody else. Or, I mean, if you're not interested in grant writing, you would be going for that somebody else position where you're doing content development. But
Rebecca, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yes. Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm currently a postdoc. I did have a question. So I know, with Prime continuously growing and it being more in like the medium-sized company, can you talk a little bit about the growth from this role?
yeah, so I think, the most immediate answer I have to that is, I mean, I've been here for 2 years and I got a promotion, right? So like Prime is very interested in sort of promoting from within. And I think, they've said that to me, but also I think they've demonstrated that. So there are opportunities, I think, for upward mobility. The other thing that's really cool is that so Prime's parent company is a company called Ziff Davis. And so there are a lot of opportunities at Prime to kind of network with other people at the larger company as a whole. There's opportunities like, if there's another business within Ziff Davis that you're interested in working at, you can kind of network and like see if there are opportunities there. So I think there are a lot of different avenues for kind of career exploration, specifically within Prime as an organization.
Great, thank you.
Another question from the chat, following up on grants. And I know we talked a little bit about sort of the strategics and the interests based off of the company, but the question was, how does your team determine what topics, therapeutics, to focus on for the grants and material?
Yeah, so sort of the like, like secret sauce of CME is, so our supporters are largely pharmaceutical companies, but it's really important to emphasize that there's a firewall between their like marketing department, and we usually work with medical affairs, which is not promotional. Like we're not doing advertising for pharmaceutical companies. They're essentially just like supporting our programming to kind of further their, mission to educate healthcare providers. And I mean, there is, obviously they kind of have to support, programs that are aligned with what the company is doing, but we're not promotional at all. So I want to first off emphasize that. But yeah, so really what we often look at is kind of what's in like late phase 2, phase 3 trials. So that's usually where we try to focus our efforts, is in, new things that are coming down the pike. Some of our quality improvement work also focuses. So for example, I had a project on HPV vaccination, and the HPV vaccine that's currently being used is, I don't know, like 10 years old. Like it's been out for a while. It's not necessarily new, but uptake has been pretty poor, right? Like vaccination rates among adolescents are pretty suboptimal. So really the goal for that QI program was to educate, clinics and healthcare providers on what the actual recommendations were, but also give them some strategies to, approach vaccine hesitancy and also educate their patients about HPV vaccination. So we do a little bit of work on, existing therapies that just aren't being used optimally necessarily, but then there's also a lot that we do on sort of emerging therapeutics that again really kind of focuses on, what's newly approved, what's in phase 3. And then sometimes also our supporters, so different supporters work differently, but some of them will put out like CGAs or RFPs that specifically ask like, we want proposals on, HIV treatment and, getting it more into like community care, right? Or, like they'll give like a specific topic that they want grants submitted based on. So that makes our job a little bit easier. We don't have to guess what the company wants. They kind of tell us, but those are usually kind of the strategies that we follow.
Question from Prabal. This might be an Elizabeth question. Does Prime support international researchers, H-1B or L visas? I see in your description here that you support folks in Mumbai.
Yes, we have in the past. I think currently we are not, but as I said, new roles are going to be opening up in early 2024. So it's definitely worth having a conversation with us about. I think it's also, each job is kind of specific to each individual, I'd say. So, depending on qualifications, background, and the team needs, it's always worth having a conversation about. So I definitely encourage anyone who's interested to apply.
Excellent. Any other questions? I do have one more. Yeah, okay. I'll give you guys a couple more minutes, but for my question to you, Bonnie, it's a sort of a two-prong, actually. A two-prong question. Actually, I'll pause there. I see Miriam has her hand up. Miriam?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry to interrupt. So my question is, since you talked about the like international students, so my question is about the work visa. What about if I have like work authorization already during the OPT period, which is the optional training? Can I apply for jobs there or not?
That is a good question. I will have to find out about that. But if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy. I know we provided our contacts in this presentation as well. Dr. Lee has shared it with us. So if you want to send that directly to me, I can find out for you and give you all those details.
I'll send a follow-up email with all the slides as well, so you'll have it on hand. So my last question to you, Bonnie, before we wrap up, two-pronged questions for folks who are earlier in their career, first, second years in their PhDs. What are your recommendations and advices looking back at younger Bonnie? And then for those who are at that cusp, ready to transition, what's your advice there, if they're different?
Yes, I think the advice for younger students is easier because it's just try everything. I think, I don't know. I personally feel like I would get so hyper focused on like, I don't want to waste my time. I want to figure out exactly what I want to do and like, use my time efficiently. And I think there's merit to that, right? Because graduate school is hard and you don't want to be constantly working yourself to the ground. But I think like not being afraid to take risks is really important. Trying things that are like totally out of your wheelhouse. I know I did kind of in addition to some of the teaching and mentorship that I talked about, I did an externship my fourth year, I think, maybe it was my fifth year, through the Career Center at Penn. And I actually got to work with the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. So I was doing like, science education or science communication. I got to like write a blog article for them. I got to like help develop some like educational programming for the Franklin Institute, which is a science museum. And that was like something that I never thought I would be doing, but was really exciting and also really kind of, I think, again, was like something great to put on an application and also really formative experience and really helped me to network and kind of understand what I was looking for in a job moving forward. So I think really don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to take risks and don't be afraid to like try something and hate it because that's still really useful data, right? It's still really good to know what you don't like. For people who are considering transitioning and like ready to kind of make the jump, I think I feel like I hate giving this advice because I hated hearing it, but like apply for as much as you can. Because I think, the more you get your name out there, like the more opportunities you can find and the more kind of you can, job application process is kind of networking too, right? Like the more people you meet, the more people you can kind of talk to and learn from. I would also say like leverage your professional networks as much as you can. And this is another piece of information or piece of advice that I feel like I don't take often enough myself because I never want to bother people. But I think, reach out to people, see if, especially if they're in an industry that you're interested in, see if the company's hiring, see if they can put you in touch with anybody who might have opportunities for you. Really just leveraging your connections, and maybe connections you don't even realize you have, right? Like ask your PI, ask people in your department if they know anybody who's in that field. And really don't be afraid to like cold contact people because I think people are generally very nice and willing to help. So
That's excellent. In fact, I believe, Elizabeth, you code contacted me, and this is how we got this started. So I think that's a wonderful way to get this
Does
circle. There you go. Here we are. Full circle today. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Elizabeth. Everyone, please give a thank you to our speakers today. If you want to get connected with them, please check out these links here on LinkedIn, as well as the job description and where to apply if you're interested. I will end the recording, but you guys are welcome to, I will stay back, and you guys are welcome to stay back as well if you want to chat with Bonnie or Elizabeth individually. So thank you all.
thanks, everybody.